Dear twin, welcome to this week's video. It's Saturday and it's a little late, so let's get this party started. My history with books began a very long time ago. My mom started to read with me when I was a baby, and I remember that she would read with me doing my reading log for school every night on my bed, and we'd fill it out together and I'd read out loud to her and she'd read to me. And I think that really sparked my passion for reading. I think the first book I ever read was Goofy Goes Fishing, which is like a baby Goofy book, I think. I'm pretty sure I started reading on my own when I was about 3 years old, so I was a little ahead of everyone else. But that gave me more time to get acquainted with what I always referred to as my best friends, because I always had a book with me or more whenever I went anywhere. I would sit at home all day, all weekend, and read after I finished my homework, which I did right after I got home from school because I was that kid. I would read as many pages of the book that I was currently obsessed with as I possibly could. I always preferred reading on a bench or sitting by the slide with a good book instead of actually playing during recess, which other people thought made me weird, but I just got to learn more about Harry Potter and Nancy Drew, so who really missed out there? So Nancy Drew books were my favorite when I was a kid. I read like the entire series. I had bookshelves full in the garage of Nancy Drew books that my parents bought me. Of course I loved Harry Potter, because who doesn't love Harry Potter? I mean, that's a completely different discussion. But yes, anything with a mystery, fantasy, something supernatural that always attracted me. And something that most people might not be able to say is that I really liked horror stories as a kid, which is so bizarre because I've always been terrified of ghosts and vampires, and that made it all the more weird that I loved Stephen King books. I still love Stephen King, but back then I would consume his books like they were food. Obviously, my parents didn't know that these books contained heavy amounts of cursing and sex scenes, but I got to read some pretty great stories along the way. Carrying on with my somewhat creepy love for literature, I really enjoy Edgar Allan Poe's poetry and short stories. I became especially interested in those during high school, also during which time I really enjoyed young adult novels like John Green books, which I quickly became obsessed with when I realized that they existed. I bought like 5 copies and a digital copy of The Fault in Our Stars. Looking for Alaska is one of my favorite books ever, and I ended up reading everything that he's written. So that's a somewhat quick summary of my reading history through high school. Clearly, when I first got started reading, it was all about the story and the mystery and the fun of it. And as I grew older, I think my book selections became more based around what I was going through in my life, which is why I really started to enjoy books like The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which is sitting on my bookshelf right now actually, but I'm not gonna get up to go get it. When I first read that story, it was almost impossible to communicate to people how much I related to the main character, Charlie. And I'm happy to say that, to a large extent, I no longer relate to him as much as I did when I was in high school, which I think is really great, because as much as I love his character, and I'm so glad that I had him to relate to during that point in my life, I can look back and read that story again and realize that I personally have moved on. As one of the most beloved and hated literary classics of all time, I was a little skeptical about what I would think of The Catcher in the Rye. It wasn't really assigned to me, but I did read it for a paper that I was writing for class, and I chose it on my own because I believed from what I'd heard through others that it was something I might enjoy. And like I said before, this is either a book that people love or hate. And for me, I developed an indescribable amount of love for this book, particularly because of the main character, Holden Caulfield. Holden is not necessarily a nice person or someone that you would want to be friends with or someone that you would want to relate to personally. He's someone with a lot of issues. He's someone who likes to talk a lot. He is someone who is not very optimistic about life in the slightest. You can see why he might not be someone you'd want to hang around or relate yourself to. And even though Holden is all of those things, he's someone that you understand. I did in many ways understand what Holden wanted and why he was doing what he was doing and his thought process a lot of the time, which wasn't necessarily good because, like I said, he was very pessimistic. But reading that book made me realize that even 50, 60, 70 years ago, people were feeling this way. People were feeling the way that I was feeling at this point in my life, and people were struggling to be heard. And I'm not going to spoil it for you because I don't think you've read the book yet, but the last 5 pages or so of that book just made everything worthwhile, and I can still quote parts of it to this day because it's an incredible story and it has helped me so much with growing and understanding myself as a person. The second book I want to discuss is also a literary classic. I know most people don't really like those because they feel like they're assigned to read them and they're mandatory and that they can't possibly be good because you're being forced to read them, which I totally understand because I hate being told what to do. But I've read all of these books of my own accord, and I can definitely vouch for them and say that they are fantastic. But this book is called Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, and it was also written a very long time ago. It's about these firefighters, and they don't actually fight fires. What they do is start fires to burn books because people aren't allowed to read, because people aren't allowed to have independent thoughts. If I remember it correctly, the opening scene of the book is the main character, who's a firefighter, finding his wife laying in bed at home, passed out or dead because she overdosed on too many pills. He then has to call these people whose job it is to bring like this huge vacuum and pump pills out of her because this happens so often in their society. When she wakes up, she can't remember why she would do such a thing because she's so brainwashed to believe that her life is perfect when clearly deep down she knows it isn't. And this is all a result of society taking away this freedom of information and independence and intellectual thought. That's only partially what the book explores, and I can't even begin to delve into how deep and passionate and well written it is, and how much I would love to go read it again right now, but I don't own a copy, which really bothers me. But if you haven't read that, please go read it. It's a great read and one of my favorite books ever. And the last book I want to talk about isn't a classic that you would find on a high school reading list, but it's definitely a classic and a classic in my heart. It's called The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. This is a children's book, but it's one of my favorite books, perhaps my favorite book since I first started reading. I have a copy on my bookshelf because my mom bought me one for Christmas last year. This book has meant so much to me in my life. I still read it today with the same excitement and joy, or maybe even more than I read it with when I was a kid, because it is so good. Shel Silverstein has been one of my favorite writers for so long. The Missing Piece, Falling Up, Where the Sidewalk Ends, A Light in the Attic. I read these books multiple times when I was a kid, and I would read them again today if I had them with me. But this book in particular, The Giving Tree, is one of his most popular. It's one of the most well-known kids' books ever, and it is about a little boy and his friendship with a tree. In this book, the boy and the tree are great friends and they love each other. But as the boy grows older, he takes more and more away from the tree because she's willing to give all she has to make him happy. Eventually, he takes too much of her and she becomes nothing more than a stump. But even then, they are perfect for each other because he is old and all he wants to do is sit, and she's a stump, and that's perfect for sitting on. And I think this book has so many different messages in it that could be explored and that I could go into far more than I probably even realized. What I take most from this book is that I can relate to both the boy and the tree. I realized that throughout my life as a kid, as a teenager, as a young adult now, I've asked for many things from my parents and from others, and they've been willing to give to me what they have. And I also realize that I can relate so strongly to the tree who's willing to give everything she has to the one that she loves so that they can be happy. And the more I read this book, the more I realize that at its core, it's about love. And I think that's what's most important to me about all of these books. That's it for this week's video, Twin. I'll let you choose the topic for next time, and I can't wait to see what your next video is about. I love you. Bye.